As the large crowd spread out along the broad parade route and settled in to find a good viewing spot, a cold mist settled over the city on this Saturday morning. Anticipation was building as everyone strained to see any signs of activity. And then they heard a band. The Armco Band, leading the biggest parade ever held in Middletown, Ohio. On November 2nd, 1929, the city of Middletown was celebrating an event that had taken place 104 years earlier. An event that transformed this small mill town on the Great Miami River into a bustling trading center and eventually an industrial city. With a large parade and formal ceremonies, the day marked the end of an era, the end of Canal days. Canal days in Middletown had begun with a festive parade out to pioneer founder Daniel Doty's farm. There, on July 21st, 1825, a large crowd from all over the Miami Valley, along with Ohio Governor Jeremiah Morrow, former Governor Ethan Allen Brown, and future U.S. President William Henry Harrison, watched as New York Governor DeWitt Clinton lifted the first spadeful of dirt. Muskets were fired, a band struck up a salute, and the Miami Canal had begun. At a dinner that evening at the Golden Lamb in Lebanon, Governor Clinton, the father of American canals, toasted the event. The Miami Canal, like the Nile, will enrich and aggrandize the region of its transit, not by fertilizing a soil exuberantly rich, but of opening lucrative markets for its products. Just 30 years after Ohio's first settlement of Marietta was built in 1788, the population of the new state reached 500,000 citizens, making it the fifth largest state in the country. But Ohio had a problem. The territory west of the Appalachian Mountains was isolated from eastern settlements. The National Road, a federal project, stretched only as far as Wheeling, West Virginia, and travel was slow and tedious. The only way for Ohioans to reach the lucrative eastern markets was by river. The Ohio River to the Mississippi down to New Orleans, and then by ship to the east. But the route was dangerous and expensive, and the result was often low prices and spoiled goods. If it was to prosper, Ohio and the West needed better routes to the east. By 1820, a solution had been found. Even before the American Revolution, George Washington had envisioned a canal system for the new country. But America's canal system actually began in 1817 with the Erie Canal, linking Lake Erie with the Hudson River and New York City. Soon after, Ohio's Governor Brown sprang into action, creating a state canal commission, and the search for possible routes connecting the Ohio River and Lake Erie began. Although canal routes were determined as much by politics as by nature, two routes in central and western Ohio were identified by Erie Canal engineer James Geddes as the most feasible. In 1825, work commenced on the Ohio and Erie Canal to run from the Ohio River at Portsmouth to Columbus, then northeast to Cleveland and Lake Erie. In southwestern Ohio, the Miami Canal would follow the Miami Valley north from Cincinnati, then extend up the Maumee Valley to Lake Erie. The southern section would run between Dayton and Cincinnati. Its construction would be supervised by Cincinnati businessman Micaiah T. Williams and well-known engineer Samuel Forer. In a letter to Mr. Williams in November of 1823, Governor Clinton wrote, "There can be no question respecting the blessings that it, the canal, will produce, the riches it will create, and the energies it will call into activity. To begin the project, contractors first hired Irish and German immigrants who had helped dig the Erie Canal. But the work needed a massive effort, and soon small contracts were let to local farmers. Advertisements were issued. Proposals and writing will be received by the undersigned at Hamilton on the 15th of July next, for the construction of about 15 miles of the Miami Canal, extending from a point on the Great Miami River 2 miles above Middletown to a point near Hamilton. Then the work began, first clearing trees and brush, and then digging, one shovelful of dirt at a time. The specifications were no less than 26 feet at the bottom, sloping up to 40 feet wide at water level and 4 feet deep. On one of the banks, a 10-foot towpath was to be cleared. Canal banks and bottoms were lined with clay. Locks were built from cut limestone. Gates were fashioned from hardwood. Aqueducts from timber. Stone culverts spanned intersecting rivers and streams. Ohio's transformation into America's industrial heartland had begun. Although Ohio's canal system was a major engineering and construction feat, the basic design was simple. Canals operate with water. That water was mostly fed by nearby rivers. But unlike rivers, with their water constantly running downhill, canals contain water. And because water seeks its own level, contained water has a flat surface. Huge loads could be moved on canals at low speeds, 4 miles an hour. But since the land is not flat, canals have to raise and lower the water level. This was accomplished by a series of locks or water stairways. Locks were stone chambers, 90 feet long, 15 feet wide, and up to 20 feet deep, designed to raise and lower boats 8 to 10 feet, like an elevator. Heavy wooden gates opened and closed the lock at each end. The gates opened upstream, and when closed, they formed a V shape facing upstream, so that the water pressure kept them closed. When a boat approached the lock, the water in the lock was adjusted to the height of the boat ready to enter. By opening a pair of valves in the gate, called wickets, the boat entered the lock. The gate closed, and the water was then raised or lowered to the next level. The gate on the opposite end was opened, and the boat continued on its journey. Total time, 10 to 15 minutes. The fact that each lock cycle released about 100,000 gallons of water meant that there had to be a plentiful supply of water above each canal summit. Damming rivers and creating new reservoirs was the answer. North of Middletown, Abner Enoch's mill race from the Great Miami River was dammed, enlarged, and cut into the canal to provide water all the way to the Ohio River. The Miami-Erie Canal required a total of 106 locks over its 250-mile length to raise its boats 512 feet from the Ohio River to the Loramie Summit, or 395 feet from Lake Erie to the summit. South of Middletown, the lock at Excello, lock number 3, later lock number 34, was the first lock to be completed. At nearby Amanda was lock number 33, and 32 was called the Doty Lock, where the canal was begun. The stone used for most of the Miami and Erie locks was limestone from quarries throughout western Ohio, cut and finished by hand with a bush hammer. A durable water cement produced from limestone, or water limes, was used as a mortar for the stone blocks. The fact that many of the original blocks still exist today in some form attests to the durability of the materials used and the craftsmanship of their construction. Equally well constructed were the canal boats, which came in several types. Packets were used for carrying passengers. Freighters hauled bulk cargo. State boats were used for canal maintenance. And line boats, fully enclosed cargo carriers. The boats were made of wood cut into planks and steamed to form into the gently curved shape of the hull. In Middletown, the digging began to the south. 2 years later, on July 1st, 1827, the first water was let into the canal from pioneer Abner Enoch's mill race, and by the 4th of July it was deep enough to float the first canal packet, the Samuel Forer, owned by Robert E. Campbell. By August, the canal connected Middletown with Hamilton, and by the end of the year it reached the canal basin north of Cincinnati. With the completion of each section came another official celebration with boats, bands, and banners. On November the 30th, one of the Hamilton newspapers reported, "The Samuel Forer of Middletown returned to this place on Wednesday evening last, on her way from Hartwell's Basin near Cincinnati, accompanied by the Washington and Clinton of the Farmers and Merchants Line, with a party from Cincinnati. Yesterday morning they all left here in fine style for Middletown." In January 1829, the first leg of the canal, called the Miami, connected Cincinnati and Dayton, and the Governor Brown made the trip over the 54-mile route. By 1832, over 1,000 passengers a week were transported over the waterway. Packet boats leaving Middletown in the evening arrived in Cincinnati the next morning. Daily lines from Dayton passed through Middletown at 11 a.m., arriving in Cincinnati 10 hours later by 9 p.m. Larger freight boats hauled grain and pork products to Cincinnati. Farmers in the area could now produce to their full capacity, knowing that there was a market to receive their goods. Meanwhile, work on the next leg of the canal, called the Miami Extension, began in 1833. The work was slowed by the financial panic of 1837, but by 1845 the 115-mile extension was opened. At Junction, the Miami Canal linked up with Indiana's Wabash and Erie Canal, giving it access to Toledo and Lake Erie. The Miami and Erie Canal was complete, and another celebration was in order. The passenger packet, the Banner, of the Doyle and Dickey line, captained by Ben Ayres, was set to make the first run from Cincinnati to Toledo. Middletown historian George Kraut writes about this event. The Banner left Cincinnati on Tuesday, June 24, 1845, at 2:30 p.m., and passed through Middletown early the next morning. A group of leading political figures, as well as canal officials, headed by Samuel Forer, Chief Canal Commissioner, were on board. The editor of the Toledo Blade, J.W. Scott, described the arrival on June 27th at the Lake Erie port. The splendid packet boat Banner had the honor of being the first boat to pass through the Miami Canal from Cincinnati to Toledo. She was welcomed by such demonstrations as the short notice of her coming enabled us to make. The long-delayed day of the consummation of the great work has arrived, and it well becomes us of Western Ohio to rejoice over it. For Middletown, the new canal meant expansion. The upper section began at a feeder from the Great Miami River 2 miles north of the city, on land owned by Abner Enochs. After he obtained permission to use the surplus water from the state dam, Enochs began plans for a new town named Manchester, after the city in Great Britain. By 1835, the town was beginning to grow with houses, mills, and a distillery. Although much of the town was later destroyed by fire, it signaled the expansion of Middletown to the north along the river. The freight business spelled success for the Miami and Erie Canal. Boats carried a variety of goods and supplies, including lumber and nails, beans and bran, apples, salt, corn butter, lard, beef, and pork. Middletown became a major supplier of pork products to Porkopolis, as Cincinnati was called in those days. Canal freighting was profitable. Transportation costs and time were cut in half, and goods from New York could now reach Middletown in 20 days. By 1835, the total collections at the Dayton, Middletown, Hamilton, and Cincinnati stations was over $30,000 per year. With the building of the canal, other related industries appeared, providing work throughout the year. In the winter, when the canal froze over, ice was cut into blocks for use during the hot summer months. Ice was also cut from shallow ponds filled with water diverted from the canal. The blocks were packed in sawdust and stored in large warehouses along the canal. In the spring, repairs were often needed, and many men were employed to reopen the canal. Around each lock, excess water was diverted through a bypass race and spillway, and soon enterprising millers saw a way to use this water power to run lock mills. South of Middletown, Samuel Dickey used the water to run a grist mill and a distillery, paying a fee to the canal office for its use. A small community soon grew around the lock, which Dickey named Amanda to honor his wife. Middletown was expanding to the south. For a while it looked as if that expansion might continue to the east, when the Warren County Canal linked Middletown and the town of Lebanon. But by the time it was completed in 1836, new turnpikes with low tolls meant that goods could be moved faster and cheaper between the two towns, and the canal was eventually closed in 1855. By 1852, the land and water rights owned by Abner Enochs had changed hands several times, before ending up with the firm of Cooper, Irwin, and Henderson. They, along with Thomas and Sherlock, formed the Middletown Hydraulic Company. After securing the necessary water privileges and rights of way, the company signed an agreement with the town to construct a canal or race to provide additional water for local industries. On July 4, 1852, water was let into the hydraulic canal, and Middletown celebrated again. At first, the hydraulic was only completed from the town to the Miami Canal, and at the intersection, gates were built to allow canal boats access to the mills on the hydraulic. When the race was completed to the state dam, the hydraulic became a separate canal, and along its banks many new mills sprang up: flour mills, sawmills, woolen mills, and paper mills, soon to become Middletown's biggest industry. By 1870, there were 7 paper mills operating in the Middletown area, producing high-quality blotting, book, wrapping, roofing, manila, news, and writing paper. From 1850 to 1900, Middletown grew from a small progressive village on the canal to a thriving industrial city. But its biggest growth was yet to come with the new century. When George M. Verity, a young Cincinnati businessman, began looking for a suitable site to build a steel mill, he became interested in Middletown. The city offered land and financial incentives. It had 2 railroads, and it was on the Miami Canal. And when a large plot of land owned by Daniel Doty right on the canal became available, Verity looked no further. At the groundbreaking ceremony on July 12, 1900, for the American Rolling Mill Company, later Armco Steel, George M. Verity hinted at Middletown's future. I wish to welcome you one and all to yonder spot where our works are in the process of construction. The location is in itself historic, having been acquired from the government by Daniel Doty and settled upon by himself almost a century ago. We hope that with your assistance we can make it famous as the location of the first steel plant and sheet mills in this broad valley, and that for you it will only prove a start in the right direction. In spite of all the depictions of canal days as romantic, life on the canal was difficult at best. Canal boat crews, or canalers, were a tough lot, given to much drinking and fighting. Saloons were located near many of the locks in towns along the canal, and it was there that most disputes were settled. These disputes arose over right-of-way into the locks, and they often ended in duels between rival mule drivers doing battle with their switches. But it was sometimes left to the lock tender or lock master to settle issues of right-of-way, and the state regulations were clear on the matter. Since the upstream boat was more difficult for the mules to restart, it had priority. That these regulations were not followed to the letter adds to many a romantic tale of life on the canal. At many locks, accommodations were made for the lock tender, and, if he had one, his family. The lock tender's duties included the operation and maintenance of the locks. The lock tender's house at Amanda was used as a model for the present-day Canal Museum operated by the Middletown Historical Society. On a canal freighter, a full crew consisted of a steersman, a bowsman, a mule driver, and a captain, the boat owner. The captain, and often his family, occupied the rear cabin in very cramped quarters. Canal families often comprised the whole crew. They lived on the boat year-round, and many of the children never went to school. Running parallel to the construction of America's canal system was the development of another form of transportation, but not all citizens welcomed its arrival. Letter to President Andrew Jackson, 1829. The canal system of this country is being threatened by the spread of a new form of transportation known as railroads. As you may know, Mr. President, railroad carriages are pulled at the enormous speed of 15 miles per hour by engines, which roar and snort their way through the countryside, setting fire to crops, scaring the livestock, and frightening women and children. The Almighty certainly never intended that people should travel at such breakneck speed. Signed, Martin Van Buren, Governor of New York. Railroads were soon to be a reality in the area, and their success would mean failure for the canals. The Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton, the CH&D, was chartered on March 2, 1846, just 1 year after the completion of the Miami and Erie Canal. By December 1847, a land survey was completed, cost estimates were submitted, and on March 30, 1848, construction proposals were solicited. 2 years later, work began, and in 1851, the first iron horse pulled into the station at West Middletown. It was reluctantly greeted by Middletown citizens who were disappointed that the line did not go through the town. It would be another 20 years before the short line between Cincinnati and Springfield gave Middletown a railroad within its city limits. By 1850, rail lines crisscrossed the state of Ohio, having begun as early as 1828, when the first spike was driven for the Baltimore and Ohio. In 1856, Ohio's canal system showed a net loss for the very first time. Up to then, it had been a highly successful venture for the state. But the advantages to rail transportation were obvious. Railroads could go anywhere, and they were easier to build. Trains could run year-round, and they were much faster. However, the cost of moving goods by canal was still cheaper, and for many years they were used to haul coal, sand, and lumber short distances. Not surprisingly, politics played a part in the slow decline of the canals. Although political compromise was greatly responsible for their development, by 1861 the canal system was being torn apart by bureaucratic bickering. And that year the canals were leased to private operators. For 10 years the system gradually deteriorated for lack of maintenance, and some sections were entirely abandoned. In the spring of 1913, a devastating natural disaster put an end to commercial traffic on the Miami-Erie Canal. On Easter Sunday, March the 23rd, it began to rain. Two days later, it was still raining, and the levees began to break. Soon a strong current of water was surging through Middletown's downtown streets, destroying much in its path, including the banks of the canal. By Thursday, the water had receded enough to assess the damage. Throughout the Miami Valley and the state, thousands of houses and buildings were destroyed. Bridges were washed away, and hundreds of lives were lost. Canal days were over. The canal system in Ohio had changed everything. For farmers, the canals meant new cash markets for their products. Prices for wheat, corn, and pork increased, while imported products like sugar and coffee went down. All along the canal, property values increased as small villages were transformed into industrial cities. Mills, warehouses, and businesses of all kinds sprang up, taking advantage of the new source of water power and transportation. The canal system brought both merchandise and consumers to Ohio. In just 30 years, from 1820 to 1850, the population of Ohio increased from 580,000 to almost 2 million people. In Middletown, Ohio, the Miami-Erie Canal defined the future. It provided markets for producers, power for industry, and passageways for people. The man-made waterway that began at Daniel Doty's doorstep and carved its way through western Ohio brought the marketplace to Middletown.